So let us start. Building with Vue. This is basically my way of trying to learn some cool new JavaScript and exercise the REST APIs that we've built and see, do they actually work in practice? So let's see. What we have is, we have a bunch of buzzwords. Vue and Vuex and Axios and Bootstrap and all that kind of stuff. So I will try and explain how on earth these things fit together with our API and what they are. The first thing, Vue is a, the hell was that? Vue is a progressive JavaScript framework. And so it's like Angular or it's yet another JavaScript framework for building responsive single-page applications. And I chose Vue because at least I find it's a bit simpler than Angular. It's a little more friendly and a little more approachable, and the documentation is quite good. So the sort of basic idea in Vue is you have a bunch of HTML, and then you have a little bit of JavaScript, and you can link them together, and Vue will take care of doing updates, data binding, and that's all that sort of hairy stuff for you. So it means you can write very clean and simple JavaScript and not have to worry so much about sort of DOM manipulation and all that. So here, for example, we see we have input fields, and they say v-model and then a string. And those strings refer to this block of data on the other side. And that's basically the Vue has a concept of data properties, and it will automatically track changes to those properties and reflect them back out into the user interface, and vice versa. So if you type something into the input field where it says v-model username, it'll update the JavaScript value there automatically. And vice versa, if your code changes the username field, it'll go like, oh, I should update the user interface for you. So it does all that stuff magically. And then on click, it says v-on-click, call sign in. So I call this function, and this function can do some logic, can do some DOM manipulation, can do all kinds of stuff. So this is the basic concept in Vue.js. Is that you bind all these two things together, and it takes care of doing lots of updates for you. Easy peasy. Has anyone used Vue before? Yeah? Okay, so 2. Okay, so let's show you what all this is about then. See if we can do a little Vue demo. There we go. Please work. So here's a little sign-in form and a little navbar where we can.
We're not saying.
You're up. Again, not helping. See. Okay, there we go. So we have a little navbar. We can click to these different things and click. There we go. And it says basically now you only get the login form until you log in. So I'll just log in. I'll try to log in, and it will. This is run against an on-site installation, but I've hidden away on this site. But let's see, it's obviously fallen asleep during lunch. And what's the other thing we can? Come on, come back. Let's see. Console. Ah, there we go. Finally came in. A little timeout. Because he could not log in with his password. There is no password. So super secure. There we go. Boom. And what this app is basically trying to build a little Facebook-like thing. So we're taking your list of favorites, your favorite companies, and that's on the left-hand side there. Those are the favorites that you've marked out in SuperOffice. So you can go into SuperOffice and push the little star, they get added to the list here. We can also add them using our little widget up here, type in. And then on the other side, we have the activities that other people have created on these companies. So it's basically, here are all the activities in SuperOffice arranged in reverse chronological order that I haven't made. So I'm interested in these companies, but I know what I've done on these companies. I'm interested in like what you guys have done. So if you create a sort of an activity to call somebody on one of these contracts, it'll show up here. So a little bit like Facebook, essentially. It's like a very boring, businessy Facebook. But it's populated automatically as people do stuff. Right? So as people create activities, they show up on the feed here. So that's basically what the app does. And these two tabs are basically the same views, but just sort of by themselves. So you can sort of see just the timeline, or just the favorites. And that's because these are reusable components. So I'm just taking two components, stuck them on the same page. Okay? Does that make a bit of sense? Okay, so let us see. Woohoo. So what's going on behind the scenes here? We've used Bootstrap. I use this component called Vue-Bootstrap, which basically takes all those CSS classes and turns them into special tags. So I can say alert as a tag, and it'll turn into the appropriate sort of CSS. So that's a component. There's a component for doing AJAX requests using promises. So Axios is this add in JavaScript function, essentially, or sort of JavaScript object you can go download, install. And it says basically you can do a GET request just like this, and then when the GET request is finished, call this function, then do this thing. So it's resolving a promise. And if you get an error, it falls into the catch part. So you all familiar with sort of promises in JavaScript? Not, yes. Let us see. So that makes programming sort of the talking to our web API much easier. Like much less callbacks and things like that. It's much easier to express these with a bunch of thens. We'll see more detail afterward. There's a router component in Vue. It's optional, but for this, I decided to use it. It's the thing which basically lets us decide like what components do we want to show. So we have a little nav bar up on the top that sort of choose this view or this view or this view. The router gives you a way to say, map this URL to this component. So when you click on it, it'll create the component and hook it up for you, do all that stuff. And it gives you a way for other components to say, like, go to this URL without having to know which component is that directly mapped to. So it gives you nice loose coupling between the different parts of your app. Let's see, state management. This is easy, right? It's like, This is like a model view controller. And I have this horrible feeling this is not the PowerPoint I was supposed to be showing you. But so far so good. We have components, which are the view part. They show, HTML. We have state, data that we're getting from somewhere. And we have actions, which sort of, in response to something you've done in the user interface, go get some more data or change the data that we have. So this is the same as it has been since the 70s. You have a model, you have some views, and you have a controller which mediates between the two. So what is old is new again. Now this is the new hotness. It's like Flux and Redux. And it's the same thing. The reason for having this introducing this stuff is the view parts come and go. Like in a very simple JavaScript application, you can sort of have everything sitting on the page. But as things get more complex, it's like, we have data that we want to share between lots of different components, lots of different views. But we can't have it in the view because the view gets thrown away. Like when we're not showing something, we don't need that component around. So the data and the state that's shown in those fields gets tossed out. And so we need somewhere else to stash that information, that state. So we have a shared state down at the bottom, but we don't want to let all different components kind of grovel over and change that state without us being aware of it. And it becomes difficult to do data binding if we don't know when the state is changing. So they introduced this idea of actions and mutations to make it easy to keep track of when is the state changing. So and that basically forces a separation of these concerns. It's like, okay, you have actions, they can get more information and so on, but they record kind of, okay, now I'm changing the state. They're saying that very explicitly. It's like I'm changing something now, and then the view system can keep track of okay, what's changing, and reflect that out into the views that are being shown at the moment. So our little app structure is like this. We have a favorites component and a timeline component, and then there's a combo component that basically just shows the two side by side. Just showing off what we can do with components. But logically, what's happening is we have a login, and then we have, in order to show the list of activities on favorite companies, we first need the list of favorite companies. So we get the list of favorite companies from the web API. And then once we've got the list of favorites, we can then go off and get the list of appointments that are attached to those companies, but which are not created by us. So in more detail, we say, go get the user info from this endpoint, user current. That's how we do login, basically. If we can get our own information back, we've successfully logged in. If you get access denied or something, then login has failed. So if you manage to get a user object back, it's like, okay, good, we're in. And that also tells us our associate ID, because that's a property on the current user. And we need that associate ID because we want to get activities created by people who are not us. And so then after we've gotten logged in, we tell the router, go show the timeline, go show the timeline view. And kick off the favorites loading. So we haven't loaded favorites yet, so the list of favorite companies. So we need to kick off that activity. go get that information for us. And then the store will say, okay, well, I need to go talk to the web API, get the list of favorite companies. And then once that comes back, then we can go off and do the appointment, get the list of appointments. And once all that data is present, then the Vue will update automatically, showing all this stuff. So all this is going via what they call the store, which is so the store is kind of the back end in this application. So I was hoping to show this, but my source code has flown the coop. So it seems my source code zip has been synchronized with an empty file. So, alas. But luckily, all the source code is in the presentation, so it just means I can't show you fun stuff that happens when we type. So we have Node Package Manager and the Vue command line interface, because nobody starts from scratch anymore. You pull down stuff from the web. So we do a bunch of commands. We say install the command line, run the command line, and create a Webpack-based application for us. And Webpack is basically, it's a way to gather all these different components and make them into one big file. And then we give it a name. We call it Timeline. Now, second line, it does a bunch of stuff for us, and we can go in and say, install all the dependencies, and then run this in a web browser, and we get this little placeholder, a little hello world app saying like, yeah, you're up and running. So what's actually happened there is when we do sort of init and then npm install, it's downloaded a bunch of stuff off the internet and put it into folders for us. So there's a source folder, and inside source there's a components and a router already set up. There's a sort of top level component called app, and there's a main.js, which is kind of it's main, it's the starting point. And there's a node modules folder which contains megabytes of stuff. All the JavaScript you could possibly imagine, and which we hopefully don't have to look at. But so the main parts here are index.html, which has very little in it, right? It's got a title, and it's got a little div called app, id equal app. And then in main.js, we say, okay, go get these packages from these objects for us, right? Vue, app, and router. And then it says, okay, create a new Vue instance, connect it to the app ID, the div up there that says app. That's this one. Put in the router. The template for this application is just the app component. And there's the component is called app. So that basically turns into that gets expanded into the rest of the application. So what is this app thing, right? The app itself looks like this. It's one file called App.vue. It's got 3 sections to it, basically, and all these Vue components have the same structure. There's like a template, there's a script, and there's some CSS. So in this case, the app basically says, show whatever the current view of the router is decided on here. So router view is kind of replaced with whatever the router thinks is the current view. The script basically declares itself as saying, my name is app. I don't have any sort of particular content, any particular logic. And then style is just doing a bit of fonting, making sure everything looks nice and smooth. So far, so boring. But we want more than one component. We want to we throw out the hello world component and replace it with our own. So we have a bunch of routes that we want to add. So login is the default one. So we say the route for slash goes to login, and then favs goes to favorites, time to timeline, and combo to the combo component. Then we want a little navigation. So we change the app template at the top to say, okay, we put in these this little nav bar with nav items shaped like hills. So you get a little sort of little blue square around our links. And then there's basically a link, it says nav item to favs, favorites, /time, /combo. Now these look like URLs, but they're not actually. We're not physically going anywhere. So if we go to here, oops, not this one, this one. You disappeared again. There. When we're clicking around here, this is the nav, those little pills. It's changing the URL up here, but it's happening after the hash mark. It's basically saying, go to a different part of this page. So changing the stuff after the hash mark isn't changing it's not loading a new page, it's just changing this location within one page. And it's a way for us to kind of add steps into the history of the browser without reloading a new page. So we're staying on the page, we're just going to different parts of it. So, but from our programming sort of side, they look like URLs. We can treat them like URLs. Okay, so we have these little nav pills up here. Let's see if I can highlight it. So we have 1, 2, 3 little navigation items, and then there's the router view still there, which means basically show whatever the router thinks is the current view. And so, let's see, the first thing that happens is we go to login. And that's the default first item in the router. It's the root path, and then that goes to login. Login basically has a form at the top that says, I have an input field and a password field and a message. If there is a message, we should show a little alert box that says you can't log in. And there's a bit of script that says basically we have username and a password and a message that maps to the vmodel password and vmodel username and message up here. And then if somebody clicks on the login button, we should run this login function, which is listed up here. And that basically says, okay, configure the AJAX Axios component. Tell it basically go to the web API with the username and password that you typed in, and try and get the current, the /user/current object. And once that comes back, then we can put that into the store. We can say set user response data, and then we can say go get the favorites, because we've logged in successfully. We can get your favorites and push this new route onto the navigate to the /combo page. This is telling it to go load a different view for us. And then if we get an error, then we should, make sure that we don't have a user and put a message. Could not log in, whatever the username is. So, does this make sense? It's fairly short and simple. The next ones are even shorter and simpler. So we have the vmodel parts that map to those data objects, essentially, those data fields. And then we have login maps to that. Then we have favorites. So in favorites, we have a little safeguard that says basically if you're logged in, so if the user object is defined, we should render this. If the user object isn't defined, then we show nothing. So, and basically what we do here is we say, okay, favorites for whatever your name is, show, then we have a v4 here. This basically do a loop over the list of favorites. And for each favorite object, display the name and department, and then put a little link in, a little button that says, remove. So if you click that, then we call this method called removeFavorites. So easy enough. And in the script portion, we say, okay, well, we want to get two functions, one called map_state and one called map_actions. And the state part, we'll get to that in a bit. But basically, we want to treat these things that are defined on state as if they were defined on us. So that's what these map functions do, is they say, give us a reference to removeFavorite and put it on myself. And these data items and favorites and user, these are properties on the state. Give me a hook onto those as well. Like you could give me a reference to those so I can read them. And then basically the only logic here is basically it says when the object is created, if there's no user defined, then go to, redirect to the root, which is the login page. And basically go to login if you're not logged in already.
Go log yourself.
Yeah, go log yourself. And the timeline is pretty much the same thing. There's like, we have a list of items in this property called items. And we basically render a bunch of properties out from that. And same thing when you create this object, if you're not logged in, go to the login page. And all the rest of this stuff is happening inside the state object. So this is where it gets more interesting. So in state, in the state management part, we define our set of properties. We have user, starts out blank. We have a list of favorites, also empty. List of sort of activities. It goes in the items list. And then we have a property that defines kind of our URL, like what backend do we want to talk to. So you'll see this, I referenced this base URL thing in the login page. Here. I said, Axios default's base URL is this.base URL. And this here comes from the state. And it's a way to configure the system sort of from one central point. Then I have a bunch of mutations. So these are ways of indicating I'm changing the state. So I can say set user, and it basically says, okay, put the parameter back into the user object. And this user here is the same as user over there. And same thing here. Put favorites, put them in. And then for the items, because we get a list of what we get getting in is the result from an archive provider. So it has a bunch of complex names like contact/name department. And those they're long and they don't map so nicely to simple property names. They're not valid JavaScript names. Like you can't have a variable with a slash in the middle of the name. So we have this little map function that maps them from the archive provider to sort of simpler JavaScript object. So that's all this is doing. And then we do a sort. We sort all the activities by registered date. We do that locally so we can get them in a sort of nice order. And then we just put that on the state. So state items suddenly is updated here. Does that make sense? So, we still haven't talked about back end. Like, where is the back end coming in? So we have these actions. So this is where things get interesting. So in the login view, we say commit set user with a user object, and then we say dispatch get favorites. That basically triggers this action, this one called get favorites here, and passes in, the context here is basically the state object again. So then we can say, okay, go get the user that we just set, get our associate ID, and then do an AJAX call. Go get the contact favorites, get our name, department, associate ID, and filter it by our user ID. Like, so basically, give me all the favorites that belong to me for, contact favorites. And then once this call finishes, we'll come back here, then we can call set favorites with the value that we got here. So we get back a list of objects that contain contact ID, name, department, associate ID. We can say set favorites, and then trigger getTimeline to say, okay, now we've got favorites, now we can go get the activities on those. So we know now we know the contact IDs, we can go get favorites for, go get activities for those contact IDs.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I don't know. So this is, let's see, so this is a nice little AJAX call with a promise. And if we get an error, we just throw up an error dialog. It's like, that could probably be nicer, but for the purpose of this example, that's fine. So let's see. So we say store the data and then trigger this other activity, getTimeline. And getTimeline looks like this. It says, okay, go get the associate ID, run over the list of favorites, pull out the contact IDs, join them together, all the IDs, and then do another AJAX call. Get the appointments with all these fields, filtered by, registered by, not equal to me, and contact ID in, list of the contact IDs. And then once that request finishes, store the values, call the set items functions that we defined. So, it's very nicely decomposed. Each function does very few things. And then we have addFavorites, similar thing. Like you can fill in a name and call addFavorite. So it says on click, add the favorite with whatever you typed into the name field. What we're going to do is, I didn't have time to wire up an autocomplete function that would show you kind of the list of matches and so on, whatnot. So what I do is I do a little do a search on contact. Use MDO list /contact with a parameter query equal whatever you typed into the contact name, into the name field. And then once that comes back, if it comes back with one or more matches, we just take the first one. So we get the contact ID for the first name that matches, and we say, okay, add that as your favorite. So then we say, okay, now there's no nice REST API for favorites, so we have to use the agents. So we say agents /favorite, addFavorite. We do a post to that with the appropriate parameters for that, and then we tell it, okay, we want to add this contact ID for this particular user. That's us. Add that favorite, and then reload the favorites again. That'll reload favorites and then trigger reloading the activities. So, see. And same when we take away a favorite, if we take away a favorite here, we say remove favorite item, and so that's the little contact, object that's got contact ID on it. And then we can take that contact ID and call the favorite agent again, say remove favorite. Pass out all these things, and then after it's removed our favorite, we can say, okay, load that list up again. So in practice, this looks like so. Let's see if we can get that working. Okay. So if we say over here, we can come up with another company. We'll see what we've got here. I say add. Okay, that one. Did I click it? Did I click it properly? Ah, there we go. So then it's added it and then reloads the list, and it shows up here. It's like, oh, Sol2 did some activity in that. If I take away this one, you see it triggers, like it removes the favorite and then triggers the reloading the list, and that triggers the reloading of the other list. Now there's some dev tools which are quite nice, and which unfortunately I can't show you because they're not installed here. And also this is a compiled site, so it only works on debug stuff. But if you're debugging locally, you can get a Vue plugin to Chrome, and that gives you a kind of a nice view into all the components. You can navigate around and sort of look at the state inside each component, and you can also look at the state inside the store. And it'll show you every time there's a mutation is called, every time the state changes, that gets recorded in a little log, so you can see, okay, here's all of the state changes that have happened sort of during the process of running your app. And you can also look at events. So every time you click on a button or something that triggers an event, that also gets logged. And it's basically shows up on the developer tools on the side. Over here is a nice little sort of tree view you can sort of dig through. So I can recommend that.
What's the name of the?
It's just called Vue, Vue debugger or something like that.
Vue dev tools.
Yeah, Vue dev tools or something. If you look at the Hello app, when you install Vue for the first time, it'll like do a little hello world, and it has a link to that, sort of, as well as the Vuex, all the different components and things. So that's very nice. So so of course the state is shared between all these things. So if I add something on this one, if we go state here, can add. It's like, okay, it's added one here, but it's also at the same time it's done the repopulate list, and that's triggered repopulate activities. But we don't see that here. But if we go over on the timeline view, we'll see, oh, there's state 0 activities now here. So, and all that stuff happens without us having to do any sort of special magic. It's all Vue doing the data binding for us. Questions? Okay, I can, let's see, there's a couple of interesting things here with the little thumbnails here. I thought it was like, oh, I could use the person/image, right? Person123/image would give me a nice, whatever the person's picture is, right? But of course, you need to provide authentication to get that image. And so that turned out to be, it was like, ooh, how can I get the image there without having getting username and password kind of baked into each request. It's like, oh, that's tricky. But in the archive, there's a person thumbnail. So you can get the base 64 encoded thumbnail as part of as one of the columns in your archive provider. So for associates, there's like an associate/person/thumbnail column. And that is a base 64 encoded image. It's a very small one, but it's like, it's there.
Just a question there.
Yeah.
But what does it mean? You said that it needed authentication. If you are already logged in.
Well, the script is logged in. Like, so when the script is doing the JavaScript calls, it's authenticating.
Yeah, okay.
But the web page here isn't authenticated. Like the web page as a whole doesn't have, or the browser isn't authenticated. It's like, so when the browser is doing a load an image, it would get back access denied.
Okay, so it's the server side that are logging.
Well, it's not server side, it's running inside the browser.
Okay.
But the,
Two different sessions.
it's kind of like two different sessions. Let me see if I can make that clearer. So when we do one of these requests using Axios, like that's a HTTP request, the browser is making that request, but it's not sticking authentication headers on it. Sort of, we're doing that explicitly. Like one of the things when you log in is we set up the appropriate authentication header for you. So all the Axios requests kind of get that authentication by default, but the browser itself doesn't get that. So there's not an easy way to tell the browser to basically, oh, please stick this username and password on those image requests. Like there is a way, but it basically entails encoding the username and password in clear text on all your images, which is probably not very secure or probably not best practice to duplicate your username and password on every thumbnail. That would, I'm sure our security auditors would be disappointed. So that was kind of like, oh okay. How else to get that image? So you getting it either, you could do it a couple of different ways. Like you could do an Axios request to get the image as a stream and then convert it into like basically a local file or something and get the images hosted that way. That's one way. You can get the image through Axios and then convert it into base 64 and inject it as a data. That's what I ended up doing, is like basically getting this base 64 encoded image. You can say image source equals data colon and then the base 64 string. And the browser will kind of go like, oh, cool. You'll notice, for example, if you do an image search on Google, like you get back a whole bunch of images very quickly, and those are all embedded in the page. They're not downloaded from a different server. They're kind of included in the page as data URLs. Okay. So yeah, so that is the end. Actually. Any questions? I'm sure it went very quickly, and I'm sure this will make a lot more sense when you sit down and go through the presentation yourself. Yes.
How it is performing wise compared to Vue?
Vue, I haven't benchmarked it, but Vue does have a reputation for being hella fast. It's very performant. So yeah.
So you recommend us to use this method with
This is just an example. This is not recommending anything, but I find Vue kind of very approachable and easy to work with. If you, but you know, our back end, our back office kind of internal systems are all built with Angular. But you know, I find Angular like too much work. Vue, much more fun. But that's just me. It's like Angular comes out of a has a whole different kind of approach to putting together stuff, and I found that just too much studying.
And I guess it would be possible to create a control application using REST API.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Building a console app would be no problem. You would use the HTTP client in C#, and go make requests, to your heart's content. That's no problem. Tony, you had your hand up?
Are you going to be able to make do you have the source on your hard drive at work?
Yes. Assuming, well, yeah, no, I definitely have the source, but assuming OneDrive hasn't mirrored the 0 bytes back down. But no, the unzipped folder is there, and I'll get it put together and up on GitHub or something. So yeah. So yeah, I've got to say, actually, working with Vue and the sort of tools there, very nice. So you make a little change, and when you're running in development mode, Vue will recompile and sort of refresh the page in your browser automatically. So it's doing kind of the NPM, what do they call it, hot reload. So that's like, ooh, it's like doing basic development, back in the old days. Change it and then CD your effects immediately.
Just a comment.
Yeah.
We create a lot of custom websites, which are tightly integrated with SuperOffice. And for the most part, we use like screens in service to do what we want.
Yep.
But whenever that isn't enough, we end up using Vue. We got a lot of cases where we use Vue and like Google Maps and stuff like that. We use CRM script as the backend.
Yeah.
That's our own custom REST APIs.
Yep.
We haven't started using this.
Well, yeah, because they've just been released, so that makes sense. But yes, hopefully you can do less making your own API endpoints and more using what's sort of in the box. Hopefully also, Skill, the new sort of our homegrown JavaScript framework, will also sort of make life easier for you. It's not Vue, but it should make life easier in terms of putting together your own SuperOffice looking components. I know they're working quite hard on sort of getting the framework parts kind of disentangled from the SuperOffice specific parts, so that the idea would be you could reuse the Skill framework without sort of having a full SuperOffice lying around.
Would you be able to combine Skill and Vue? Or is it more like competitive?
I don't know. I haven't seen enough as to sort of be able to say one way or the other.